Three, two, one, boom. We should be rolling. You guys, I am joined by number one New York Times bestselling author and former Navy SEAL, Jack Carr. Thank you for coming, man. I really appreciate this.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.
Man, this is exciting stuff. How are you? You busy?
Busy times, but that's great. Great problem to have. In the lead up to a book launch week, I have just interview after interview after interview, kind of to let people know that there's a tour coming and that sort of a thing. So you're bouncing from one thing to the next, essentially all day for a solid 2 weeks, and then you go into book tour on the road where you do a lot of like local kind of like AM radio to let people know, hey, I'm in Houston tonight or I'm in wherever. So you do a lot of that, and that's a usually a solid 2 week trip. But it's blast. It's so fun, but it's busy because you finish one book, your mind's already on the next one, and you're working through that, and then juggling a few other things as well, like scripts for the next series. Although writer strike just happened a couple days ago, so that's pencils down on that, which means I prioritize other things like the nonfiction work that I've coming out in a year and a half on the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing. So I'm not lacking for things to do, but I feel extremely fortunate.
I'm sure you're not. That was one thing I was going to ask you. Do you have any idea how many interviews you've done over the past month or two? Because I've been keeping track of you a little bit, and I'm like, my guy is everywhere right now.
It's crazy. So David Brown, my publicist at Simon and Schuster, who's an awesome guy, has been with me from the beginning. He keeps track of all that. So eventually, I was just thinking about that the other day. Actually, I was thinking about asking him for a list just to see. He sends them out every now and again, but it's been a little while, so I'm curious as well. It's a couple.
And I saw you were just on Cleared Hot with Andy Stump. It's funny
Yep.
because I was just in the new Black Rifle location in Kalispell like 2 days ago, and I was walking around. I was like, "Oh, there's Andy Stump." I didn't want to interrupt him; he was working, but I was like, "Man, small world."
Feel free to always interrupt him, and anybody listening to this, feel free to always interrupt Andy, no matter what he's doing. It's okay. Do you live up there? What were you doing up there?
Yeah, I live in Billings, Montana, and I was
Nice.
over on that side of the state doing some bear hunting with a friend, and we had to stop in there and grab a coffee. My wife and I wanted to check it out. So, freaking awesome location. They really
Yeah.
killed it over there.
Yeah, they did a great job. I had a pour over coffee when I was there, and they made the perfect pour over. Usually, I church up my coffee a little bit with some honey and some cream. Same thing, less like my protagonist in the novels. But in there, they did the pour over. They did such a good job with it. I didn't need any of that stuff. It was so good. It was awesome. But yeah, I flew into Billings. Not well. I guess it's been a while now. Did a mule deer hunt up there in the break. So flew into Billings and then drove out from there. And it was cold. Oh my goodness! It was my wife's hunt actually. So
Yes.
it was a mule deer hunt for her, and our daughter came with us. And maybe it was 10 years ago now. It was a while ago. But man, it was freezing on that hunt in the breaks.
Yeah, it usually is. I was in the breaks this past year elk hunting, and it's some gnarly country. So kudos to you guys for getting out there and getting after it.
Yeah, yeah, she got one, and yeah, it was pretty cool. We had a great experience out there. It was so cool. We had some wonderful pictures. Our daughter was quite young at the time, so we're like head to toe in Sitka. My buddy sent out a whole like a pallet to where we were going. So and we gave it all to the guides and everything at the end, or no, not at the end when we opened it. We're just like passing it all out because it was a huge pallet. I thought they were just going to send like a bag with a couple things, and they ended up sending out a full pallet out there full of stuff. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Listen, I was hesitant to tell you this, but I'm going to anyways. So I've had a copy of your book. I believe David sent me a copy. I've had a copy for roughly 3.5 weeks. And I'll be honest with you, I have not cracked it open, and there's a reason for that. I don't want to rush it. I think I read In the Blood in like 4 days just because I got so sucked into it. And I'm like, I just really want to appreciate this book. I've been waiting a long time. I'm fortunate to get it early, but you know how it is. Like, because when it's over, it's over. Like when you're watching a new show on TV with your wife or something, when it's over, you're kind of like, oh man, what the heck? So I'm finishing up the book that I'm on, and then I'm going to slowly take my time with Only the Dead. And I figured I was hoping that you'd appreciate that.
Absolutely, because I totally understand. On my podcast, Danger Close, I've read all the books for people who have come on thus far. I don't know if I'll always be able to do that, but I have so far. And a lot of them, actually, the people who I've had on, what I learned from them has actually made it into the novels. So there's some crossover right there. I won't tell you what it is because you haven't read this one yet. So I won't tell you what I specifically for this one, what made it in there. But it's yeah. So I understand having to read how the difference between having to read something very quickly for an interview. It's a different experience than sitting down with it to enjoy it. Those are two separate things. So I completely understand and appreciate it. And you got the hardcover, right? Did you get the hardcover?
Of course, of
Oh, good.
course.
I told David not to send out the galley. So the galley copy is this. This is a called a galley, and it's like, but it's still a rough draft. And so,
Hmm.
and initially for the first couple books, I sent galleys out to everybody. But with this one, I'm like, I don't want anything that's not the best version of the book out there. So I think a couple of them might have escaped from Simon and Schuster, but not many. So I just would rather have someone wait like an extra week until this thing's published and get the
Yep.
actual best version. So I'm glad you got the hardcover.
I do, man. Yeah, I'm very stoked about it. Something that is I really appreciate from you, and you put it in your author's notes and stuff, and you say it publicly online, is that you're very intentional with what you say and how you say it, and you're very respectful of people's times, especially when you're writing your novels, which are all freaking amazing. I'm a huge fan of them, but people are essentially trusting you with their time. Can you touch a little bit more on that and why that is so important to you?
Absolutely. That's the one thing we have. Yeah, well, I say there's two things. We're all on a journey. We're all moving forward in life, and we all have limited time. Once it's gone, we're never getting it back. Those are the two things there, and they're very closely related that we all have in common, no matter where you were born, what part of the world, what your socioeconomic status is. No, it doesn't matter. You have limited time on this earth. So time is a theme that continues to weave its way into the pages of my novels, whether directly or indirectly. But personally, I think about that quite a bit as well. So that's why I put the exact same amount of thought, which is all of my thought, into any sentence on Instagram or Twitter, blog posting, or any sentence in the novel. And my goal is always to write the next sentence better than the sentence before, the next book better than the one before. I always want to move forward, get better at my craft. But I think about that people trusting me with that time and following me on Instagram, following me on Twitter, going to the website, listening to the Danger Close podcast. So I put a lot of thought into those questions as I go through these conversations with guests, and then I put a lot of thought into every single sentence in these novels because people are going to read those sentences, they're going to read those chapters, they're going to read those books, and they're not getting that time back. So they've trusted me with that time, and that's something I take extremely seriously.
Can you, I know you get asked about the writing process a lot, and you have your own process, just like everybody has their own process with it, whatever it is that they're doing, routine type of things. But instead of that, can you walk me through, like, do you keep a journal, like when you're working on a new book, or notes in your phone if you're maybe just driving in Utah or with your wife or hanging out, you're like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like, do you keep a journal? Like, I've recently started doing that, and it's been one of the greatest things that I've implemented like throughout my daily life and just my routine in general. I can keep all my thoughts there. Helps keep me off my phone. Obviously, we're pretty glued to those these days. Just a good old pen and paper keeps me on track. What do you do to kind of like just make sure you have everything dialed in if you think of something that you don't forget it?
Yeah, so the journal's a fantastic idea. So I don't keep a journal, but I keep a journal-like book for each novel. So each one, it's like a notepad. It's over there in that corner over there. I have a stack of them from the previous novels, but just like a notebook that's about that thick. Mine are these like I don't know if I probably fake leather, but anyway, just a book that I easily identify as the one to grab when I'm going like to the airport or whatever else. So that's the one that's going to have those ideas that I write down when I don't have my phone, and I oftentimes don't. I don't like having my phone with me all the time, but when I do, I'll send myself emails to a specific email address that's only 4 emails about the book, only ideas for the book that I'm working on, or a future book idea, or something like that, so that it doesn't get polluted with anything else. So I have a specific email account just to send myself emails about the specific book I'm working on. I have a notebook for also, so those things go together. But then I also have a separate computer that only has that email address on it. So when I open that computer, which is right there, there's nothing else pops up. No other messages pop up to distract me even for a second. Not like, oh, you just ordered a T-shirt from this company, and now I'm going to get an email every day for the rest of my life trying to sell me more T-shirts. Like, there's none of those pop up. No personal
Right.
emails, no work emails, nothing like that. Only book emails, only that project, and they're from me. So no one else sends an email to that email address. I guess except for Microsoft when it's time to update a Word or something, but that's it. So those 3 things. It's the email address that's only for about the book. It's that notepad that's only about the book, or notebook that's only about the book, and a computer that is specific to that book as well. I also get a new computer each time, just so I put the other one away, stack it up, and I start a new one, clean and fresh, and that's this next project. So those 3 things really help with all the distractions out there, especially digital distractions. And
Hmm.
then also, I don't write in a room with my phone or with this computer. I go into a separate room with that computer right there. I take that with me, so I am separate location from where I do other things, and the actual electronic device is a separate entity for that project. So that's kind of how I break that down.
Let's dive into the book a little bit. I'm big on reviews, regardless if it's a book, if it's a movie. I'm a big IMDb guy. I'm always checking out reviews or maybe a said product that I want to buy offline. I'm always trying to see what people are saying about it. One of my favorite reviews from your books, and you'll help me correct this if I'm wrong. I think it was either Rogan and or Chris Pratt put a very simple sentence together and said James Reece is one rowdy motherfucker.
Yeah, that's Chris.
And that is absolutely it is absolutely perfect. If people are listening to this, I'm sure they're very familiar with you and your books, but it's spot on. It's just absolutely spot on.
Yeah, no, that was from Chris, and I think he said that in the lead up to, I think right when we started filming, I think Terminal List, if memory serves. I think he said that, and yeah, fantastic. That was a great one. So thank you, Chris.
So I'm looking at the book and I've noticed it's a little bit thicker. It seems a little
Yeah.
bit thicker than the previous books, and I've heard via you that it is probably, well, not probably, but it is the most brutal book that you've written thus far. Can you dive a little bit into that without too many spoilers?
Yeah, so I didn't start off with, hey, this is going to be the most brutal book yet and the longest book yet. I just started off with, okay, I know where it's going, because during the previous book, I knew where this one was going to head, especially as I got closer to the end. I have a folder on my computer where I put how ideas for the next book and that sort of thing, as I'm typing away. So I knew where it was headed, but I didn't say it's going to be the longest and the most brutal. Like, that's not part of the calculus. It's just whatever it takes to tell the best story I possibly can. So this one can also be used as a blunt impact weapon or as a doorstop. People that are watching can see how thick that one is. And it ended up being 139,000 words, which is the longest to date. And so I never get to like 100,000 words and say, oh, I have a looming deadline, time to wrap this thing up. Nope. It's just, if I have to push a deadline, I'm pushing the deadline. Once again, going back to that time, it's about those people who are trusting me with their time, either listening to it these days or reading it. And it's going to be the best story that I can possibly make it, regardless of deadlines and regardless of length, either how long or how short. It's going to be the best book I can possibly make it. And the goal is always to do it better than the time before and to move the genre forward, even if it's just by a degree. Those are things I'm thinking about as well, because that's adding value to the readership, to the listenership, to the genre as a whole, and making me better at my craft. That's always the goal. So yeah, so this one ended up being a lot thicker, but then as part of that writing process, then I go in, I have that theme, I have that title, I have that 1 page executive summary, I turn that into the outline, and then that into the narrative. So, and however long that takes is just how long it takes. Simon and Schuster probably doesn't like to hear that, but that's how it goes.
So obviously James Reece has been through a hell of a lot of tragic things. One of my favorite relationships throughout these novels that you've written is James's relationship with Katie. and I'm very curious to see where that relationship goes in this new book, Only the Dead. But man, hear me out. James just deserves love, man. He deserves some love, and I hope that you give it to him. I really do.
I do hear that quite frequently, actually, more frequently than I thought I would. So people do have have a vested interest for some reason in those two characters getting a happy ending, and we'll see. We'll have to read to find out.
And I'm really banking on it, so I'll probably get over it one way or the other. But
Nice.
I've noticed when you were writing Only the Dead that you seem very into your setting. You have to be in a very good place to write. It seems like you just bring your laptop, maybe your notebook that you were talking about, go around a cabin in the woods, you're outside taking a walk, you're hearing the elk bugle. Like I'm right there with you. I need a good setup. That's why I built this studio out down here. And can you touch on that, like the importance of that to get your mind working as freely as you want it to, just setting?
Yeah, so I don't need a great view. I don't need anything like that. I just need quiet, uninterrupted time. Those are the two things, and it's harder and harder to come by with more and more projects. And in today's day and age, it's easier for people to, to contact you multiple ways and that sort of a thing. But when I sit down, it's the interruptions that really get you, or get me. And so that uninterrupted, quiet. I can have a blank wall in front of me. That's fine. The first one I wrote really between 10 and 3 in the morning in our little office off our bedroom in Coronado, California, when I was still in the military. When we got out here to Park City, Utah, I started working because I thought I was going to have a nice office in the house, and I did, but it was in the house. And as soon as you close those doors, for anyone listening who has kids, it's like a magnet. They don't want anything to do with you when the doors are open, but as soon as you close the door to work, for some reason, it's just a magnet for kids, dog, wife, whatever. That's how it goes, or at least how it goes in this house. So I started going down to the local library and using one of their study rooms that you could, rent or reserve for 2 hours at a time if no one was waiting. So usually I'd have most of the day to write until high school got out, and then high school kids would come in and need to work on a history project, and then I'd get bumped out for some high school kids or whatever. Last one, I started renting places around Park City, and I ended up in one cabin that was fantastic and wrote a lot of it there. And I thought I'd do that for this one as well. And I got over there and it just didn't feel right this time. I mean, it felt like, my family's, I can essentially see our house, and I'm not there, and I just felt bad. So I just, we paid it, whatever, but I didn't go. I just stayed like one night, and then I just came home, and I tried to find a quiet time up here in a certain corner of the house that I used to just for writing here, just off this room. And I'm still trying to figure out what a good solution there is for quiet, uninterrupted time with wife, 3 kids, dog, all the rest of the things going on in life in general. So I'm still working on that. Still work in progress.
I was kind of laughing to myself when you were saying that because I'll be upstairs. My dogs are fine when I'm upstairs, but if I come down in the studio, shut the door, I hear them barking up there. I gotta text my wife, hey dogs, I'm doing an interview. It's
Yeah,
always that
it's
inopportune time.
well, it won't bother me. I completely understand, and that's just kind of how it goes in life sometimes, or most of the time, I should say. The times that you need it to be quiet, it's not, and vice versa.
Mm. Can you talk about, and maybe this came from just being in the teams, but um, you love sharp objects and the tomahawks and all of that. Can you kind of like touch on like why your logo is what it is? I've always been curious, and I'm sure you've talked about it before. I must have just missed it, but that I'm definitely curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been into knives since I was a little kid, weapons in general since I was a little kid. Like a lot of us are, I think, we're just kind of drawn to those types of tools, especially if you're seeing it in like in old westerns or whatever else. Drawn to the bow very early in life as well. So I always had a bow growing up. Always had multiple blades growing up. Usually pocket knives, back then. Nothing expensive or anything like that. But just always drawn to it. You're sharpening sticks. You're making with weapons and tools, you're making more weapons and tools. That sort of a thing. Or learning how do you do man traps? How do you make a booby trap? Like that sort of. How do you make a snare? And reading about those things, studying up on them as much as I possibly could. But when it came time to start writing this first novel, I knew that I wanted, being a student of the genre and a student of popular fiction, film as well, just from the fans' perspective, I understood the importance of a prop, for lack of a better term, a weapon associated with a character. Rambo, of course, has the knives in the movies and the bows in the second, third, fourth, fifth movies. So I understand the importance of that, and so I thought I want to do something that hasn't really been done before, at least in modern popular culture, popular fiction. And so I gave my kids for my retirement, I gave each of them a tomahawk, a Winkler tomahawk, like this one right here. First I called them up and I gave them a Bible, and I gave them an antique nautical compass. And I said, here are things these are to guide you. And then I gave them a leather bound edition of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I said, here are your natural rights. And then I handed them the tomahawk and I said, and here's your means to defend them. So I had their tomahawks in my office in Coronado, California. Months later, they're still in my office. I think one of them was in my daughter had hers in her room, but for the two boys were in my office there. And I was thinking as I started down this path, I was like, you know what? I need a logo. So, first going back to the protagonist as I wrote the story, I wanted a weapon that would speak to his character and would have a deeper meaning than just, oh, a cool knife or a cool gun or whatever. I wanted something that spoke to him as a student of warfare. And so it just was, I've always been into tomahawks. I was buying old tomahawks, 30 years ago. And I've just always been fascinated by those and the stories of guys using them in Vietnam. And I would, so I was trying to track things like that down. Cold Steel made a couple back in the day, probably 25 years ago. So anyway, I was always into that anyway. And I thought, okay, an ancient weapon that's made using a more modern technique, but still harkens back to its ancient origins, speaks to this character as a student of warfare. And I was like, okay, tomahawks is his weapon. And then as I got closer to publication, I had the tomahawks in my office there, and I looked at them and I was like, I need a logo. I don't know where that came from. I started maybe thinking in terms of a brand or how to get the word out there. Once your product is fantastic, people need to know about it. And if you're a one person show, you have to be the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the social media manager. You have to be all of those things, product designer, everything. So I took those out of the boxes and I put them on the ground and I crossed them. And then I took a picture and I sent it to Daniel Winkler and Winkler Knives, and I've known him for years. And I said, do you mind if I use this as my logo? And he said it would be an honor. And I was like, oh man, thanks. And then when I got to Simon and Schuster, I showed it to my editor publisher, and she was like, oh, this is amazing. And it's stuck. So that's where it came from.
Really cool. One thing that I really enjoy while reading the novels is how relatable they are. Like I know you see my shirt,
Yeah,
Knock on
knock on.
Archery with
There we go. John
With
Dudley.
duds, yes sir. And then you have like just very subtle things that I think people around maybe my age, I'm almost 30, or if they're outdoorsmen, they kind of understand it, like the Black Rifle Coffee, and obviously Knock On, and the Sig 365 XL and stuff like that. I really love how you incorporate those things into your story very subtly, but it just kind of makes at least myself as the reader smile and be like, hey, I have one of those, or I'm familiar with this guy. I really love that. Can you kind of just talk? Was that something that you were debating on? They're like almost mini shout outs to people that you are friends with, I think that's really cool. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so it's very natural for me to incorporate. So it's not product placement. Somebody cynical or somebody trying to critique would frame it as such, but it's not really that. It's there are things that tell a story that someone who doesn't know the background of those brands or tools would have a harder time doing, because they're just going to go to the internet and say, "Oh, I need a Navy SEAL knife." Navy SEAL knife. Oh, that looks scary.
Sure.
I'll have my guy carry that, even if it makes no sense and isn't really an. So it kind of exposes the inauthenticity of that sort of a thing. So for me, coming from as a gear guy growing up, gear guy in the SEAL teams, always wanting my guys to have the best, latest gear we could possibly have going down range to give us any sort of an edge over the enemy that we possibly could. It's very natural for me to incorporate gear into the novels because it tells me a story. If I see somebody at a range that's wearing or just anywhere, that has a leather belt, leather outside the waistband holster, Cox and Lock 1945, like that tells me something about them and their training, what they've done. And same thing, I see somebody that's got a nylon belt, a Kydex holster inside the waistband or appendix, and a striker fire pistol or whatever else, like that tells me something about them, as does the watch they wear, the shoes they're wearing, the car they pull up in. All these things tell a story. So I use all of them as character development tools. So for me, incorporating gear, one, it's natural to do anyway. And if I'm using gear it depends on the person, it depends on the character. Like if I need the story to show that this person doesn't know what they're doing, then I kind of go a little bit lighter on those, because I don't want to, just be kind of a jerk about it. So I'll kind of describe those types of things, and even everybody will know what I'm talking about. That's in the community or that's into these sorts of things. But that shows that person has no idea, or they're like a wannabe, or they're like, they just discovered hunting yesterday, or they like whatever it is, and you can paint that picture with the gear that they use, how they use it, how they wear it, like that sort of a thing. So it's very natural for me to do that. And it's just, I also love that I can help some friends out by putting Nock on in there. Savage Son, my third novel, has an archery component to it. And so it makes sense for me to incorporate John Dudley and John Barklow and talk about Total Archery Challenge and how they met there. And it just goes into, well, how does this SEAL know about the bow? Why is he into archery? Well, I give a background, and that background happens to be rooted in reality with people who are real, and it also helps them out a little bit, I hope, as well. So I like to do that, like to help out my buddies as much as I possibly can. But it also has to add to the story. So it's not just like, oh, there's this horrible product. Like no one pays to be in it. No one paid to be in the terminal list. Like a lot of people thought, oh, how much do those brands pay to be in there? Yeah, they paid $0 to be in that show that streamed over, a billion, plus minutes. That's first, whatever out there. But there was no paid product placement in there at all. Some of that stuff was authentic to me in the books, and then some of it with how you do things in just the prop world in Hollywood. Other things just kind of make it in there as well, and that's just part of it. But it's not a paid deal. It's more like you have to you want to do a favor for another friend. Like it's not just to me who wants to do that. That's in other industries as well. It's just very natural for I think for you to want to help out your friends. So some things make it in there in the show because of that. It's the same reason, but it just makes it in from another entity, if that makes sense. So I love using that stuff. Surrounded by gear. I know where it comes from. I know who makes it. And I know what story it can tell if I use it as a character development tool. So for me, it's just very natural to do that.
Very cool. Listen, I want to be respectful of your time. I got one more thing and I'll get you out of here. You were recently asked a question on the All Around Adventure podcast. You've always kind of knew you wanted to be a SEAL. You always kind of knew that you wanted to be an author. I think the question was kind of like, are you surprised with the success? And I really appreciated your answer because you basically said, this is kind of strange for me to say, but not really. Like you kind of manifested this whole thing, and correct me if I'm wrong. Do you have any advice for people that are like seeking out new things and the importance of like manifesting it and believing in yourself and just going for it?
Well, I think you have to do that, regardless, but then you also have to put in the work. And so for me, that is understanding the history of my genre, understanding the books and the authors that move that genre forward, what time they were writing in, what influenced them, and really understanding that as part of your foundation. And it's a shock to me always how many authors don't know the history of the genre in which they write. I happen to grow up studying it from the fan perspective. So I wasn't studying it with some, Machiavellian end state. I was enjoying it. I loved reading and I loved watching movies and I loved watching TV shows. And I was learning through that love of that art form, or a subjective art form, just like all art is. But it doesn't have to be art. It can be anything. I think any industry, it's important to know the history of that industry, and who were the movers who laid that foundation that you're now building upon if you're new to it. And one that gives you respect. Two, you're taking lessons learned from other people, not learning them yourself. You're going to learn plenty of lessons yourself along the way. That's just going to happen by default. But you can start at a higher level by learning some other lessons from people who came before you. So it just makes sense. But it takes more than just like believing in yourself and manifesting itself. Then you have to put in that work, and understanding the history of your industry, I think, is vital to laying that foundation. So people ask me about that. Are you surprised? They expect you to say, oh, no one's more surprised than me. And I don't know, I hear people say that and I'm like, really? Like, you were surprised? Then I don't know, I either think they're either lying, or they just, I don't know. But regardless, that's not me. I feel like I was about as prepared as I could possibly be to become an author, and about as prepared as I could possibly be to be a leader and an operator in the SEAL teams. Didn't realize how closely those things would be related, because I've been studying warfare and terrorism and insurgency and counterinsurgencies for as long as I can possibly remember. And it doesn't just happen. And I'm just talking about like high school or anything like that. I'm talking about early on. I was always just drawn to that, drawn to the study of warfare from a very, very early age. So all those things kind of came together at the right time and place. But I'm very fortunate to have not been distracted by all the things that are out there today, because we didn't have those growing up. Eventually we had an Atari 2600, but I mean, you put in 20 minutes on that thing, and that's about as much as you can do on an Atari 2600. It wasn't like an addictive thing that kept you there all day as a gamer. You had to get outside and do things and read, and reading was a natural part of my life growing up, from my mother who's a librarian. So I feel like I put in a lot of that work at a time when I was doing it just from the fan perspective, just for the love of it, which I think has served me well. But I feel extremely fortunate for that.
Jack, man, thank you so much for coming on, being a part of the Nock Performance podcast, dude. This was freaking amazing. I think I'll see you here in a couple weeks, actually, in Salt Lake for your book tour. I do have a ticket. So we are roughly 8 or 9 hours from there. So I might have to hop in the Tundra and get going that way. Shake your hand.
Oh man, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And but if something comes up, don't worry, I won't hold it against you. I'll see you another time. But it's a long way to go. So, but thank you so much, and thank you for having me on and for all the support. Man, I sincerely appreciate it, because this is really has the readership it does because people took a risk on me as a new author, and then told a friend, told a family member. Chris didn't tweet or post about the show until after I hit the New York Times list. So it wasn't on Rogan until afterward, wasn't on Tucker until afterward. So, and now I'm so glad, because now no one can say, oh, the only reason you made the list is because you were on Tucker or because you're on Rogan. So now I'm glad those guys didn't have me on until after I made the New York Times list, because it really makes it really special in that it was grassroots. And it was someone just like finding this book and looking at the cover and maybe liking that, or reading the synopsis and liking that, or whatever, and then telling somebody about it. And that really is what was what built this readership. So I sincerely appreciate it, and that's why I love going to these book signings, so I can shake hands and say hi and say thank you in person to everybody who's made this possible. So man, thank you.
No, man, thank you. I'll get you out of here. Jack Carr, ladies and gentlemen, thanks again, man. And we'll see you in a couple weeks, brother.
Sounds great. Take care.
See ya.